we're having to attend via Teams. And this meeting of the Building Council will be recorded on MS Teams and uploaded to the internet and will be stored as part of the Council's webcast archive. I have the discretion to terminate or suspend filming if, in my opinion, allowing filming to continue with prejudice to the meeting. Equally so, items that I heard in private will not be made available to the public. There are no private items to be heard today. Thank you. So, can we have order of business, please?
Order of business is as per the agenda.
Declarations of interests, anyone? Don't see any declarations of interest, thank you. Minutes of previous meetings. Did everybody who's on the committee get a copy of the minutes of the previous meeting? I take it we're all agreed on the minute. Moving along, action log, item 4.2, the action log. Any comments on the action log? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I'm just looking for a wee update on it. There's no comments on it, so I was just looking for a wee update from both of the owners on that, please.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone like to comment on the item 1 and 2 of the action log? Can we have some updates or completion dates, please? Mr. Oliver.
Thanks, Chair. My one, the Chief Officer placed one. The expected completion date can be the next audit committee. The information has been requested and will be provided ahead of next audit. Thank you.
Thank you. Noted. And any comment on? Oh, sorry, Kevin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we don't have a colleague from Health and Social Care, so we'll take that away and circulate an update by email, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Councillor McCall, is that sufficient?
Absolutely. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to item 5.1 is the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review Report, and we'll hand over to David Gladwin, please.
Good morning all. Thank you, Chair. This report informs Audit Committee and subsequently full Council of the Treasury Management activity undertaken during the first half of the current financial year and forecast activity for the remainder of the year. The report is provided in accordance with the Treasury Management and Annual Investment Strategy approved in February 2025. Audit Committee today are invited to comment on this report before onwards presentation to Council later this month. Section 3 of the report provides members of Audit Committee with some background on the role of an Audit Committee in the Council's Treasury activities and some general Treasury management background. Section 4 outlines the main areas of Treasury activity during the first half of this financial year, which focused on a continuation of our strategy to use internal borrowing whilst longer-term borrowing rates remain higher than future market expectations, combined with eating into the Council's substantial borrowing requirement when valuing the Public Works Loans Board borrowing rates presents itself. Section 5 of the report firstly provides a summary as detailed in Appendix 1 of the economic environment during the first half of this financial year. It then goes on in sections 5.2 and 5.3 to cover actions and plans in the second half of the financial year. For the first time in many years, this includes some debt rescheduling. This is an option always available to us and one that's constantly reviewed, but in recent times it has rarely aligned to our key metrics, which are the ability to repay a loan at a discount, a positive net present value, and the ability to refinance the loan at a lower interest rate than its current tenure. We saw significant value in repaying and refinancing at a discount of £1.064 million, a loan of £12.7 million at a fixed rate of 4.55%, which was drawn in 2007. That's contrary to the date that's in the paper in the agenda. I think it says 2027, so that's 2007. So a little typo there, just on the bullet point that I think let's see on page 22 of your agenda. so drawn in 2007 and with a maturity date of May 2053, and this aligned to all our metrics. So you'll recollect the position as at 31st of March 2025 showed an underborrowed position of £90 million. As at 30th of September 2025, this had reduced to £68 million. As a consequence of long-standing effective Treasury decisions and continued slower than planned capital expenditure, Council avoided the need to take longer-term borrowing during the continued higher interest rate environment. However, we can't become over-reliant on internal borrowing and continue to explore good value medium-term opportunities to borrow using available PWLB rate discounts in place. As some context across Scottish local authorities, graph 1 on page 28 of your agenda pack shows that all but one council were under-borrowed at 31st of March 2025, with Midlothian sitting very close to the median figure. The profile of funds on deposit you see in Table 2 on page 20 of today's agenda shows an increase from the 31st of March 2025 due to some borrowing that was undertaken early in the financial year, linking into the Council's cash flow. The Council currently has no deposits with other local authorities. Section 6 updates potential indicators based on actual activity during the current financial year. A revised suite of potential indicators will be presented to Council in February 2026 in the annual Treasury Management and Investment Strategy and Prudential Indicators Report. I think we'll need to rename that one. Section 7 and detail Appendix 5 again shows Midlothian's average loans fund interest rate in a very strong position relative to other mainland Scottish councils, with it back at the lowest in Scotland. To illustrate the financial benefit this brings to the council, a move to just the Scottish average would have resulted in an additional £6.1 million of annual loan charges. Alongside providing comment on this report, Audit Committee are asked to note actual and planned Treasury Management activity in the current financial year, the updated potential indicators, and the loans fund rate relative to other councils. I'll now invite any questions from members of Audit Committee, and with me today is my colleague Gary Thompson, who, as you all know, provides strategic direction for the Council's Treasury function. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Questions from committee? Councillor Smale, please.
Thank you very much, David, for a good report here. The interesting point technically maybe is the refunding or refinancing of the 12.7 million. And obviously there's an interest rate issue there, but in accounting terms, where does that discount of 1.079 million go to? A capital matter, I presume. It'd be lovely if we could put it against the general account, but I'm sure that's not possible. Or is it just knocked back in the CIES so it won't have any effect on us at all? The second thought is really bigger area of when are we going to hit our borrowing limits? Clearly, this year, like so many years in the past, we haven't actually built out the assets of the council as fast as we expected. So our borrowing is below the authorised limit of 604.9 million. But there may come a point at which we hit that limit. What would happen then?
David, do you want to come in now? By the way, David, I don't see Gary online. I take it he's with us.
He is indeed, Chair. I've already checked that. Just my safety blanket in this space. He is here. So thank you, Councillor Smale. The accounting treatment of the discount, it's an interesting point, and it's not one that I've settled on yet. We have some options what we do with it, and we're just currently exploring these options. As I said, it's been a long time since the council did this, and I just want to carefully consider the options we have before I then present to council, which I'll do at Q3, just to agree how we incorporate that into our balances. There is an option to include it in the general fund balance, but there's also other options to maybe pop it in the capital fund or to release it over a period of time. So I want to just understand and make sure I'm okay from an accounting point of view with the options I present, and then we can then have a conversation about what we settle on. The second point about the borrowing limits. So we're coming to an annual basis with updating the strategy, and indeed part of the strategy updates the limits that the audit committee and council set for me and my team to borrow money. So those figures are constantly updated, and I think that at that point on an annual basis, Councillor Smale, that's where we would have the conversation about our borrowing ramping up to a certain extent, and comfort that audit committee and council have to increase the amount of flexibility I have alongside that to take that borrowing. So I don't think we're going to reach a sticky point where we can't do anything, because we're always ahead of that in terms of our strategy. But nonetheless, we still have a lot of borrowing to take to support our capital plans as they currently sit.
Thanks, David. Councillor Smale, you happy with the reply? Councillor McCall, please.
Thank you, convener. I just wanted to say very well done to David and Gary and the team. It's such a great report to read, and I particularly like Appendix 5, David. I just wanted to say that. So congratulations on a job well done. Thanks.
Well said, Councillor McCall. I second that as well. Councillor Smale, is that a legacy hand? Are you coming back?
No, it's a new hand. No audit committee meeting is complete without me asking about Hill End. Hill End's doing very well, and that's great. And one of the thoughts I have is, under fair value principles, whether or not it ought to be revalued and become an asset which again will attract lenders to the council to our covenant. Maybe too early to do that, and also a question of whether any of the preparatory expenses, which we know we've had big overruns, need actually to be written off.
David?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Smale. So, yeah, the value of the assets at Hill End, and indeed the value of any assets we hold, are revalued on an annual basis through our capital accounting. So that's something that will happen. So the extended extent, or the increased extent of the assets, I suppose, at Hill End with the coaster, it's something that will be revalued if needed as a regular part of our accounts. The costs that are chargeable to the capital programme are determined by the local authority accounting code of practice, and that's very much what we fall in behind that, as you would very much expect, and that's what we've reflected in the costs that you've seen go through the capital plan for Hill End. In terms of future borrowing, again, in a local authority context, that's something that we can do if we're creating an asset or improving an asset, or whatever avenue we choose. So that flexibility is something we already have through the Public Works Loans Board, and indeed other avenues if we choose to explore them, although it's quite difficult to see why PWB, especially with the discounts we have, can or where they might be beaten. So we have that, all your, I suppose, maybe your concerns or your observations there. We have dealt with all of these. At this stage, we don't have any costs that we would consider that need written off against the revenue account. That conversation may come at the next stage of the Hill End development, because we've obviously incurred significant costs in advance of the build and refurbishment. But there is a project that's similarly aligned to the original project, albeit in a slightly lower form, a lower scope, or a lower size, really, with slightly different a slightly different offering as part of it. So the cost we've incurred to date will be measured against that, and there may be a need to write costs off, although we're hoping that's not the case. So I think that maybe picks your questions up, Councillor Smale.
So we could have an upward revaluation on one hand, but a writing off of costs that clearly are sunk revenue items on the other.
As with every capital project, if the project doesn't go ahead, if it doesn't go ahead, there's obviously costs that will get written off because the project, the asset creation or the asset enhancement doesn't take place. So those would be written off costs. And for a project that changes its shape or direction, there is consideration of some of the costs, whether they're still attributable to the new part of the project or where the project ends up, if you like. As I said a couple of minutes ago, I'm relatively comfortable at this stage that the project is still similar enough to the original project by way of design and other areas that we're not going to be in that space. But it's something we will keep a very close eye on as we come to elected members with the revised plans and ask for approval.
Yeah, perhaps surprising coming from me, but these leisure assets have had a very hot time in the last 12 months. Particularly, I'm thinking of the Welsh zip wire, which was bought for an enormous sum of money. So, in terms of fair value, a special type of asset and quite difficult to value, but you will find some upsides if you want to take that route. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer, David. Thank you for your question, Councillor Smith. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to let Councillor Smale know that we had an advert running on ITV last night while I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here was on, and I'm sure that will increase even more our visitors who are coming to Midlothian. I believe it was very well received. I haven't actually, I wasn't watching it myself, but I believe there's quite a few councillors saw it last night. So onwards and upwards.
Thank you, Councillor McCall. I hope you're not suggesting that the intangible asset created for our Midlothian brand is valued by David. I think he might find that a bridge too far.
No, I think the comfortable thing for me as chair of the audit, and indeed for all the committee members of the audit, is the Hill Lions now starting to make a return on our investment, which I'm comfortable with. Okay, no more questions. We'll move on to item 5.2. And I'd like to welcome Duncan Steinbank, our internal auditor, to the meeting, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the internal audit work completed since the last committee, being reported at 5.1. Purpose of the report is to provide members of the audit committee with details of the recent audit work that's been undertaken. We're presenting two audit reports as part of this meeting. You'll find that it's a school and social work transport audit and the foster care and adoption audit, both of which are providing limited assurance. You'll find the executive summaries of both audits, school and social work transport on page 53 of your packs and foster care and adoption on page 63 of your packs. The school and social work transport audit was part of the 25-26 internal audit plan. However, the scope of the review to be completed and was reviewed to meet the requirements identified by members the 25th of June 5 Council. Specifically, the audit review was to focus on the control environment in place for the 24-25 financial year. And as a result, the report grading does not necessarily reflect the progress that's been made in 25-26 in relation to the project that's been undertaken. Therefore, in the 24-25 financial year, the audit identifies that there was a lack of council policy for school transport, a lack of clarity on authorisation procedures, no investment in appropriate software solutions for school transport, financial information specifically on school transport not flowing appropriately within the council, and due to limited staff resources, limited contract management processes being in place. However, management are reporting that as a result of improvements in a project that was already fully funded and in place before the audit started, a school transport policy has now been implemented by councillors in May 25. Authorisation procedures for ASN transport have been agreed, and the policy provides a clear framework for authorisation of mainstream educational transport. The project is investigated software solutions and is planning to get appropriate solutions in place. Improvements in availability of some of the financial information for 2025 have been made, and there's a need to bring that within business as usual processes, which includes the staff a review of staff resources and procedures, which are planned to take place as part of the project process for 2026. A tender process was also undertaken for all client transport, which then came into place for August 25, and then now ensures that we have a proper contractual framework in place for client transport going forward. In relation to foster care and adoption, the audit provides, again, overall limited assurance grading, although policies and procedures are in place for foster care and adoption and segregation of duties for the payment allowance of fees in place. However, 13 overpayments amounting to 150k occurred, and invoices had not yet been raised at the time of the audit for the 7 overpayments and adoption cases that needed to be. Rates input to a mosaic were incorrect for some elements, and setting of rates for adoption allowances was unclear. A small number of incorrect payments have been identified as part of the review. Management had prior start to resolving these issues and have committed to implementing all the recommendations made within the report. I'll pause there for any questions on those reviews.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you for that. I know you wouldn't have taken this lightly to put the level on limited assurance, which throws up all kinds of connotations, which the audit committee will be aware of, throws up significant gaps, weaknesses, and non-compliance were identified when no controls were in place. Thanks for that report. It's a very thorough report, and thank you and your team for all the work you've done on that. I'll now invite questions from the committee to the auditor. Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think the first question I want to ask is on the statement within the report that we do not have an existing home to school transport policy. I find that impossible. I absolutely find that impossible. We have seen report after report after report on home to school transport that has constantly talked about changing policy from 3 miles to 2 miles. We have seen report after report coming forward on the problems with school transport that talks about the school home school transport policy. I could have maybe accepted a report that says we don't have an up-to-date school transport policy, but to say we don't have a policy, I find it almost impossible to believe, or else that we have been seeing reports for officers at the most senior level that have simply been made up. Because this isn't a new subject. This budget has been overspending by nearly £1 million a year for the last 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer, to the extent that we actually asked officers to look at rejigging this year's budget to increase the budget by £1 million, because it was quite clear it couldn't be coming down. So this is something that has been at the forefront of the most senior officers in this council looking at. And to be told today that we do not have an existing home to school policy, if that's true, heads should absolutely roll. And I just want some kind of definition or explanation as to how we can have no home to school transport policy, because I'm quite frankly astounded by that.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Duncan. Do you want to come in on your findings in the statement made there?
I'll briefly explain. Obviously, we now do have a school transport policy in place, and there was one approved by council in May 25. So there is now one in place going forward. It says in respect to the period prior to that, as part of the audit, we were not provided with one, and were unable to establish that one was in place. But there was one in place for adult social care, but not for mainstream school transport. So I'm unable to talk to any further in respect of that.
Councillor Milligan, do you want to come back in?
I think it's incumbent then on the senior officers attending this meeting to talk to us and to tell us how we have seen report after report after report that has talked about we need a new policy. And I think people sitting here will be very clear that we have been discussing home to school transport for years now, and indeed some of the budget savings over the last 5-6 years have talked about changing that policy from, for example, 3 miles to 2 miles. And it actually had figures next to it as to how much it was spent. So somebody has to tell us whether or no that somebody was just making up the fact that we had a policy that we were changing, or has the internal auditor simply not been supplied by the senior management cohort with the home to school transport policy? Who would it be? Because most of the reports came from education rather than the transport team on budget savings. So somebody had to have sight of a home to school transport policy if we were looking to change it. So I think somebody within the senior management cohort has to tell us what we've been discussing for years.
I quite agree with you, Councillor Milligan. I was shocked when I read Duncan's statement about us not having a policy. I think also to compound that, the systems didn't appear to be working very well either. The travel team had a system, education had a system, but they weren't communicating with finance, and that was another real letdown for the council on communications. I know it's very difficult. We don't have anyone from education. We've got the new incumbent temporary education officer with us, director with us. So I don't know if you'd like to comment, Mr. Oliver, on anything.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. You know, in terms of the previous post being the chief officer placer, the transport, the travel and transport team, and had processes in place to deliver home to school transport. I can endeavour to look back to the position that Councillor Milligan states with regards to the policy position. That has been reported up through the internal audit team. However, I will take that action away to see and just cross off the element with regards to the transport policy from an education perspective. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mr. Oliver. Just at this juncture, I'd like to wish you well in your new post and hope things go well. But when I was first elected, I was told this council has a policy for everything. So you'll be well guided and protected. Any follow-ups, Mr. Milligan? Would you like to ask any other questions at this juncture?
Chair, there are other questions I want, but I've still not got an answer to this question. You know, we've discussed, Kevin Anderson's here, Dr. Vickers is here, we've discussed numerous times the council home to school transport policy. It's been at Business Transformation Steering Group, it's been in front of the council. It's not just in the last year or two, but I'm talking about the last 4 or 5 years. When Mary Smith was the Director of Education, one of the proposals she brought forward was moving for a 3 to 2 year, 3 mile to 2 mile policy. How can that be possible if we didn't have a policy?
Okay, I know there's other elected members who like to come in and ask questions, but I'll bring in Kevin Anderson at this time to give us a reply of some sort.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So clearly we now have a definitive policy. What we haven't had prior to that is something in terms of the criteria about eligibility. So transport provision was based on referrals that the travel team received. In terms of the eligibility of that, that's not something that's questioned by the transport team. And clearly that was a failing that has been picked up through Duncan's audit. Collectively, I think there's enough blame to go around in that regard, that clearly we've tightened up those processes, and this is clearly a report that reflects backwards as to where we started from, which was not a good place, and that's acknowledged across the transport sphere, as Derek was indicated, as well as our education colleagues who were not present in terms of the practices that did take place before this definitive policy has been agreed at council. So it's simply on the basis of eligibility criteria. There is a position now that is filtered through our education colleagues to be quite clear about what type of transport that is provided to individuals, and that was in place for this year. And certainly the process adopted was much smoother than it has been in previous years. There are some anomalies as we don't have all the available detail if people move house or so on, but in terms of prior years, it's simply been on the basis of referrals that the travel team have received. That didn't reflect what happens in terms of adult transport, and that's why the current position that we've adopted does reflect the practice for allocating resource and access to transport eligibility as well. And that's largely based on the information that was received from, as I say, education colleagues on those who were within their care and who required transport provision for a range of reasons. Clearly, the travel distance was one of those, but there are other factors that could come into play as well, but they are subject to, or were subject to, discretion. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so just so as we're clear, Kevin, you're saying we didn't have any policy for home to school transport, but we had policies for social care and adult transport.
Yeah, that's the case, but there would be custom and practice, if I term it that way, in terms of the process for school transport.
Right, okay. Excuse me, elected members, I'd like to bring in Grace Vickers at this time now.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I'm having connection issues, so I'm keeping my camera off. Can you hear me, Billy?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Yeah. I'm happy to pull together policies, procedures and guidelines if that would help. And we can present that to the cross-party client transport working group, just so that we can map all the documents that have been in place over some time, Councillor McEwen, if that would assist.
Yes, it would. It brings me to ask a question. Again, apologies to elected members who are waiting. I mean, was that information not transmitted to Duncan during his investigation then?
So, Chair, I wasn't involved in the collation of any of the documents, but happy to pass to Duncan to give an overview of what he's received.
Okay, Duncan.
Yeah, Chair, we will have been provided with all those documents, whether we did a kind of a comprehensive review back beyond the 24-25 financial year, because we were looking specifically at that particular year. So yes, there were, there were an element of procedures and guidance in place, but actually having a policy that wasn't in place, and that's why we've called it out as part of the audit.
Okay, so going forward then, both Mr. Oliver and Grace Vickers is going to come back to us with all the information that was there in place as some sort of policy that we were following, or some sort of process that were meant to be following. Is that a fair conclusion, Councillor Milligan?
Thank you. I certainly think we need a lot more information, because I'm just not getting this at all. I'm not even getting Kevin's answer. How would the transport team know whether somebody was eligible or not? Most of the people, there would be a criteria there that would be met, that I would have thought that either education, social worker, that would have come up with that criteria. I'm just not getting this at all.
Okay, well, based on the... Sorry, Duncan, you wanted to come in?
Just to also add, there is legislative requirements that the council has over transporting children, which were absolutely in place. So there is an element of legislation. So we and the policy then amends that legislation specifically for the council area in place now. But yes, the legislation would have always been in place, and we would have needed to adhere to that.
Okay, so we'll look forward to getting the information that that's going to be coming forward, and hopefully the new policy will be adhered to and developed, obviously. So we'll close that question on policy at the moment, Councillor Milligan, but feel free to come back in. Councillor Bowen.
Thanks, convener. My question was broadly the same as Councillor Milligan's, but in addition to that, I just wondered, has this question of school transport, so on, and issues with it, has it ever been dealt with by the audit committee in the past? Does anybody know? I would have thought that if there was had been ongoing issues there, that this would have been picked up at some time in the past. I mean, I'm obviously speaking as somebody who's only been on the audit committee for what, about 2.5 years or so. So I'm speaking from a position of lack of knowledge, but I would just be interested to hear from other members, if there, or anybody else who might be aware of whether this has cropped up before. Thanks.
Well, I can't answer that, Councillor Bowen, but what I can say is that this audit investigation, if you like, was generated by the huge overspend in such a large overspend in such a short space of time that's stimulated and generated this report. So I'd like to bring in Duncan.
Yeah, just to answer your question, Councillor Bowen, there was a report that was brought to Audit Committee before my time, but in 2021. It was can definitely be described as a light touch audit report. It didn't come with any recommendations. I think it may have had some reflection of the timing of that particular report because we were still in the midst of various COVID lockdowns at that point. However, you know, there was mention of that, I believe, in the council meeting in June that had previously been brought, and this report is of a far more detailed measure, and we've been through each of the control areas within the environment and brought recommendations that will then bring a change to that control environment going forward.
Thank you.
Councillor Bowen, okay?
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Smale.
Thank you for that. Yeah, my group looked at in detail at this issue about 7 years ago, and we were told basically it was all procured normal rules of the council, and that we had a statutory obligation. And apart from the 3 miles to 2 miles, there wasn't much we could do about it. My heart sank when I read that this issue was notified to us by children and parents. I wonder how they managed to know what we didn't know. You think about this situation as you analyse it. At the top, there are a few unscrupulous suppliers who billed us for far more than we should have been billed. We then have an informational flow that wasn't telling us exactly how many seats were being taken on what routes, and we didn't have exactly the right codes to be able to bill them. And I'd quite like to know from our Section 95 officer if there's any further recovery we can have from that type of supplier. It does seem to me that also we connected with a problem that people may be self-certifying that they need a taxi for their child together with a minder. And we touch on this in a fairly light way, saying that the taxi driver should meet the parents once a year. I think that's quite sensible. But at what point does a child growing up in this world cease to be cotton wool clad and doesn't need a taxi and then can cope with the real world? We don't seem to be tackling the issue of excess demand that we've created because of the flexibility of the existing rules. So my main concern, and there's 3 tiers of the unscrupulous supplier, the information network, and people gaming the system. It's actually the bit in the middle. And I'm not sure that our Section 95 officer was ever receiving the right sort of information, particularly as there seemed to be a huge cluster of bills submitted right at our year end, when of course we're trying to close off the books, etc. And that indicates there was a systemic failure. Why do we need to know about this? Because going forward, we're going to have to be advocating change, which might be the 3 to 2, it might be the use of public service vehicles. And in all these cases where you're coming between parents and their care for their children, there will be quite a big kickback. So we need to be absolutely clear why it was that we got into this undesirable situation.
Thanks, Councillor Smale. David, would you like to come in on the financial side, and then I'll bring in Duncan? Is there a recovery mechanism?
Yeah, so I think the situation just across, you know, in any circumstances, if we've overpaid for a service that's been provided, we always have the ability to basically chase that or you know, get or recompense from whatever the supplier is and whatever the situation is. So that's a situation we always have. So if we have got clear evidence where we've overpaid a particular supplier or contractor, we can pursue that. So that's a given, and that's the rules that we work to in that space. In terms of the spend last year, yeah, we have discussed this in detail. We did it at BTSG and again at council in June. So I'll not, I'll not recount all of this because this, and Duncan does pick up some of these issues in the report. But for me, in terms of being able to give to elected members what I would consider a reasonable and projection of cost and income so that we can then make some decisions on some of the strategic direction of the council. There was a lot of spend coming through, a large value coming through late. There wasn't a record of contracts that was available to us to match the spend against. The detail of the spend that was going through the financial ledger was vague, I think, in some cases. So we couldn't, there wasn't a contract reference on it. There wasn't a particular time frame on some of these. So we weren't able to match things back. And we didn't have a system where we were identifying the commitments with these contracts as well. Now, these are all lessons that have been learned, and we're in a hugely different place for 25, 26. And the figures that I'll present to you at council in December on the projection against budget in the current financial year are based on a comprehensive set of contracts and information, and I'm confident these are now being monitored in the right way, and that we are reporting with a degree of accuracy. There will always be some change over the course of a financial year in an area like this, but yeah, that I suppose was a history for 24-25 and why it made it so difficult to do anything accurate from a financial projection point of view, but a very different place now for 25-26. So pause there, Chair.
Thanks, David. Okay, I'll bring in Duncan and then I'll bring in Councillor Milligan.
Thank you for your questions, Councillor Smale. The one particular contract where we had issues around overpayments that was both the school and parents bringing it to attention. That one has been dealt with, recoveries have been made, and the contractor that was on those particular routes is no longer running those routes for us in that respect. So that was dealt with on that one. As David's just eloquently put together, obviously with August 25, we had a contract put in place that will then ensure that actually the invoice information then starts to come through correctly to the council, because we now have appropriate contracts in place to ensure that that does happen and the information starts to flow through from the providers in a manner that we want it to. We're making sure, and the key thing in respect of that is to then make sure that that information continues to flow both from contractors to the council, but also within the council, and make sure that it's coming to David and team's attention at an early enough stage so that he's able to include it within the financial reports, which is when we've made the commitment, not when we get the invoices in at the back end. And the review of resourcing in this area, because this has been achieved through having a project team on that particular area, including the tender contracts, and then subsequently going through to the information that's now being provided, is to make sure that we have the right resources on a business as usual basis for the council to make sure that this isn't a project that then delivers but continues to deliver going forward, is also key over the next year to make sure that we're embedding those changes in the control process.
Thanks, Duncan. Just when we're on that subject, excuse me, Councillor Milligan, I'll bring you in a minute, and then Councillor Smale. The intriguing thing for me was reading that invoices were being authorised for payment where they had insufficient information on them, i.e. no route numbers, for instance, and they were still being paid. I didn't quite grasp why a simple process of not enough information on an invoice was still being authorised for payment.
If I come back in there, Councillor McKeown, if I may.
Okay. Yes, of course.
So that's one of the reasons why the education team that was signing off the invoices had actually created a database of information around the routes that wasn't being provided to finance, but they were using it for the purposes of then being able to reconcile the invoices that were coming in, because we didn't have the contracts in place necessarily demanding of the contractors exactly what information we required on the invoices, meant that there wasn't enough at that point to run the process the way we would like to run it going forward. But that's now been put in place, and I know there's been conversations backwards and forwards with the contractors in this year, but I think it's also important that put it on record that the intention is to come back in the 26-27 internal audit plan and have another look at the process following the improvements that have been made, so that we can provide further assurance back to the committee that we're now in a place where we're getting all of the information that we should be getting going forward.
Okay, well, as the saying goes, that was a fair one, a very fair one. Councillor Milligan.
Chair, I'm not sure if Councillor Smale had finished his questions, so I'm quite happy just to sit till Peter's finished, if he wants to follow up.
Councillor Smale.
Thank you, Councillor Milligan. Just following up on David Gladwin's response, I think if I read between the lines, what you're saying is, well, the problem is we can't really go back to get some compensation from many of the suppliers here because our information is not perfect. On the other hand, perhaps we're in a strong commercial position, because if we were to suggest that they cut their winning estimate for the next period by 5%, as a sort of estimate of what may have been the excess profits here, they have the choice of either walking away from the council or actually doing a deal with us so we can get some of this overspend back. So my suggestion is that we're not too pernickety about the precise information we have about the overcharging, but if we feel we have a case, we should make some sort of commercial move.
Thank you, Councillor Smale. Duncan, do you want to come in on that before I bring in Councillor Milligan?
I just wanted to check with Councillor Smale as to what he was perceiving as overcharging, because as I said, the one incident where we knew that we were getting overcharging because the buses weren't provided necessarily, in that case the recovery has already been made. If we're talking about buses that are being run under capacity, that's because we have requested the buses and the buses have been provided. That's not an area where it would be considered overcharging. That's a case of us making sure that we get better information going forward so that we can right size the service that we're providing to meet the demands that we see fit, and that's definitely part of the projected project going forward, to get that information in the first year and then be able to make further judgments going forward about what size of transport provision we need.
So if the
overspend come back in, Peter.
So if the overspend was not very much to do with unscrupulous providers, maybe it was to do with the increase of the pupil population, but that's something we should have been able to project and forecast. There's something here that I think both Councillor Milligan and I are missing, is why did it start to go wrong when it went wrong? I don't think the growth in population is so very rapid that that would have been a major cause, but I think weakness in invoicing is probably the bigger problem we have.
Yeah. Duncan.
If I can comment specifically on that point, and there were 3 significant reasons for increases in the costs in the 24-25 financial year. Well, 4 actually, if you include it. So there was a general inflationary increase uplift that went through, and you would expect to see that coming through, particularly in the transport industry. In the August of 24, we then had the school day being made the same across the council schools, across the secondary schools within the council area. That then increased the transport costs, because we did have some buses that were dropping off at one school and then doing another run to pick up, whereas we then needed 2 buses to do the 2 schools because they needed to arrive at the same time. In respect of that, in the January of that year, the decision to close the Mayfield Primary School and transport the children through to their revised accommodation in respect of that clicked in. So that was additional cost that came in place in January 25. And on top of that, we have seen a significant increase in the ASN population of pupils being transported over the year. So those 4 causes provided the increased costs and the overspend that was being seen. As is, having gone through that, there were then impacts that hit at the beginning of the year, we had then impacts that hit in August, which will always be the case for school transport because there's a re-provision, and you need to take into account in August what the likely provision is going to be for the next for the rest of the financial year. And then we had the ASN population that was growing throughout the year, with a reasonable sized increase actually from January onwards, and the Mayfield costs coming in January, which meant that the back end of the year did see an increase in costs above, I think, what was expected. I hope that helps in terms of giving an understanding of where those cost increases came from.
Yeah, thank you. It does, and at least the much wider issue of why ASN is growing so fast in Scotland. I'll leave it there and let Councillor Milligan come in.
You're sounding great, Willie, but your mic's off.
I see, that's what I was just going to say. It's very unusual for Audit to be online, but can I ask everybody to mute when they're not taking part in the proceedings, please? There seems to be some sighing and some other noises coming through, and this is being recorded and is going to be released to the public. So if I can just ask everybody to be reminded of that. Councillor Milligan.
I'm just looking at this, and I mean, I'm sorry, it's a damning indictment, your ability to deliver within budget, and I'm just sorry, you look at this, it's just like a lack of council policy for school transport. I just don't accept that there has been. Or it means that every paper we get as elected members, it would be as well just getting a magic wand, just genuinely. It just makes a mockery anything that the council and get elected members. A lack of clarity on authorisation procedures, on something that's been overspent, a budget that's been overspent by around £1 million a year for 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer. No investment in appropriate software solutions for school transport. This is something that the very highest level of this elected member council have been looking at. Officers have been asked to look at all this stuff, budget after budget after budget, to see where savings could be incurred. And we now see a no investment in appropriate software solutions. Financial information specifically on school transport not flowing appropriately within the council. Something we had been assured that would be halted when we had this problem with the maintenance and budgets. Due to limited staff resources, limited contract management processes. What department are we talking about? What department had the limited staff resources? This is something that's been at the forefront of stuff. Let's keep in mind here, let's keep in mind that in this year's budget, we included an additional £1 million to get a balanced budget for home and school transport. David Gladwin states we're in a different place, a hugely different place this year. You're right, David, we are. We're another £900,000 overspent, up and above the £1 million we put in under the new contract you're telling us we've agreed. £900,000 additionality. That's where it's going. It's not coming down the way. It's gone up the way. And I'm really baffled as to where we're going with this. Because what we're talking about, a tender process for client transport has been undertaken to ensure that there is appropriate contractual framework in place. Yet the budget has another additional £900,000 in overspend. This overspend hasn't just appeared in front of us. Had we not put an additional £1 million in at the budget for 2025-26, we would be sitting with an overspend currently of £1.9 million. And I'm just flabbergasted that we didn't have a more in-depth statement of how we're going to control that, because that budget, that overspend, isn't coming down the way at this moment in time. It's heading up the way. It's continuing to grow to where we're almost at the point of when we'll come to look at next year's budget, we're going to have to put another £1 million in to have a balanced budget the year after. I'm lost with this. I'm just really lost with how we've done this. We're talking about the most senior officers in this council in these departments looking at these budgets for years, and yet we're being dealt this now. This budget, as I say, for 5 years has been overspent by £1 million. Are we genuinely saying that our finance department, our auditors, our senior management cohort didn't go in and look at this in real detail to say, how can we reduce that £1 million overspend? And the only thing that was put in front of the 18 elected members was, okay, let's cut the mileage that kids have to walk to school. Let's go from 3 miles to 2 miles, and that'll save us money. It just makes a mockery of what's put in front of the 18 elected members here. It really makes a mockery of where the governance for this stuff is. This is a front line service. It's fluent, it moves, and therefore should have the most in-depth oversight by senior management team and audit and finance and legal right across the board, because it hasn't just came to our attention this, it's been coming to our attention for a long time. Over successive administrations, this has been a problem for us. And you look at it now, where we're sitting here, where we're now saying, well, we've got a policy and the bill's going up the way. Nah, I'm sorry. I'm just baffled as to how the 18 elected members are meant to have governance over stuff if the stuff that's been put in front of us doesn't give us information that's required to do our job.
David?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to come back on a point of detail there, just about the, I suppose, the interface between the 25-26 budget, how it was set, and also where we got to in the 24-25. So the 25-26 budget, as you quite rightly say, Councillor Milligan, we added £1 million to that. But we added £1 million to that based on the figures that we were working with for 24-25, recognising that costs were well in excess of budget, and to set a reasonable balanced budget, we needed to add a significant amount of cost. But that decision was taken in advance of knowing where we ended up in 24-25. And as Duncan's picked up through the audit report, and we spoke about at Council in June and in some of the meetings prior to that, there was a significant unknown cost or unseen cost that came through in the last quarter of 24-25 that we obviously didn't know about when we set the budget, and clearly couldn't take that into account. So that was about £700,000. So if we'd known about that £700,000 when we set the budget, we would have added £1.7 million to the budget rather than £1 million. And the figures that I'm projecting for the current financial year are £200,000 more than that. So we've only seen a cost creep in 25-26, or a cost increase, if we can call it that, of £200,000 based on the actuals we had for 24-25. It's not it's not the £1 million, the 700 plus the 200, as you kind of outlined there.
Yeah, David, Milligan. Thank you. I actually know why we put the extra £1 million in, because we actually raised at budget transformation that this had been continuation over the years. So therefore it was prudent to put an additional £1 million into the pot. But what officers explained to me up until now was that the additional £700,000 overspend you're stating as was because we did not have a good management system. We did not have good oversight. We did not have a home to school transport policy. That's why this additional £700,000 has crept in. Now we've got this policy, is what you're telling me is it's not going to reduce the cost. Once we've developed a policy, it's actually going to increase the cost. We'd be better going up to just letting them do what they want to do, because that would reduce the cost under these circumstances. But the fact of the matter here is, it was elected members that asked for the budget to be realigned at business transformation because of the continuality of the budget being overspent. because we wrongly assumed that officers had done everything in their power to check to see whether the budget being spent on it could be drawn back into line. That's certainly what I had assumed, and I would suspect every councillor sitting there would have suspected in the operational part, where we continually are told as politicians to stay out of, that officers would have had due diligence and looked to see if this £1 million overspend could be reduced. And during all that time, we went along to where we ended up with £700,000 additionality coming in. I'm sorry, but it just does not make sense to me. And to go for another additional £200,000 this year, once we've developed a home to school transport policy, as we say, it just, I'm sorry, it's just not making sense whatsoever. At what stage and where in the budget do we get to before we actually say this is just completely out of control? You know, I'm going back 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 or 5 years as well, where we were looking at ways of making budget savings and reducing this. We would need to drop this budget by £1.9 million just to get back to where we were when we were talking about reducing it. That's how we would, that's the figure. David, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we would have to go back by £1.9 million to that figure. We need to manage to trim it back to there, to where we were officers were telling elected members you needed to move from 3 miles to 2 miles to start saving the money. And I'm just not sure who's not been doing their job here, because somebody certainly hasn't.
You, Councillor Mulligan, for that.
I'll come back in on the point around the control environment. So in terms of going forward with this, where this will take us is get us to a point where we have the base level of a control environment, which will allow you then to have the information in the accurate format to be able to then make defined policy choices going forward that may allow actions in values, but that's about having a policy, implementing it, making sure you stick to it for a year, and then making sure that you've got that right software in place so that when you consider you've got the come back to impact on. So that's the place we need to get to with the control environment, can then start to make those informed when it comes around that time. And then there is obviously been authorization that probably should have been better and should have been controlled in a better format, and there may need to be a review of the clients in there and going forward. Notwithstanding that, obviously we've had a significant will be one of those drivers of the costs. Need to be accounted for in that, but yeah, that gets you to the point where the information flowing through then gives members the correct information to make those policy choices. And I think through the cross-party working group, and I'm hoping to be invited to at least be on that and be involved in it, as well as then coming back to do a follow-up review. We'll to that point where we are able to consider all of those control elements moving forward. I'll leave it for others if there's any further comments to be made.
Well, whilst I'm pleased to hear that, Duncan, I do think that to give some sort of comfort to the audit, myself as chair and the audit committee, we need to have a full review going forward, just as you've outlined. But more than that, I think we need to have audit involved annually on monitoring the home to school transport. Indeed, all the budgets. We must try and adhere to all the budgets. It would be remiss of senior officers and us councillors not to monitor the financial well-being of the council, which is very, very important at this time. I'll bring back Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, I certainly think we need something. This is a frontline demand-led service, and it requires to have the highest oversight, because it's one of these areas where if anything could go wrong, whether that's just mistakes being made or fraudulent activity, this is the kind of area in the council that you would expect auditors and finance officers and legal officers to be all over the topic for this. I do have a couple of things I want to add, but I just wonder if Dr Vickers wants to come in before I want to just shift on to something slightly different and more questions as we move forward.
Thanks, Councillor Milligan. Dr Vickers.
Thank you, Chair. So Duncan had outlined that we implemented all the transport arrangements in line with statutory requirements, but I do wonder, Chair, the Scottish Government have school transport guidance, and I wonder if we need to be in line with our own policies, procedures and guidelines. Duncan referenced the increase in ASN so that we can map all of this out, because I do worry moving forward that we may not be able to afford to fully implement what is in line with the guidance, and whether we want to do that piece of analysis, a bit like you're seeing in adult health and social care, demand for increasing social care, because I do think our increased demographics moving forward and the increase in ASN transport, it would be useful for that deeper dive for the cross-party client transport group to do. So we know our baseline, but moving forward, do we fully understand the for 26, 27, 27, 28 and so on? And Chair, you had asked maybe for members to get an annual to get a quarterly update, so we can really have an overview of spend every single quarter, because I do think some of these decisions to keep the spend under control will need policy decisions on.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Dr Vickers, on what you're saying. Whilst we don't want to withdraw services from ASN users that really need the service, I think we do need a review to ensure that the proper service is being delivered to the correct people. I think that's very, very important, and that's substantially what audit I'll pick up. Councillor Smale.
My concern is likewise that, and as ASN cases, sometimes there's self-certification going on. I presume not every one of our 45, 47% who are ASN are entitled to a taxi and a driver in attendance, but the costs here per head are really very high indeed, and we should be in a position where these contracts are reviewed every year. There seems to be an assumption that once you're an ASN person that's entitled to this, and some have to be, I get that, but that there's no question, particularly in those cases of sort of mental depression, that actually after a year you maybe are not entitled, or you don't need it anymore. In fact, it's unhealthy to continue to chauffeur a child to school until they get to secondary level. So I'll just throw that in to emphasise what I think Grace and William just said, that we really need to look at what actually is the ASN requirement, and if Scottish Government produce guidance, that's fine, we should look at that, but it is only guidance.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I agree. That's exactly the point we're making. But we need to give Audit Committee comfort that this is going to be done and monitored. Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, I'm kind of now interested in sort of what we are doing, because I just kind of, when David talks about we put £1 million in last year, had we seen the outline figure of 700,000, we'd have put 1.7. I'm not sure we would have put the 1.7 in, David. I think members would have been asking what the heck officers were going to do to bring that budget back down again and bring it back in line with what we would expect it to be. So the next question is, what are we doing to bring it in line? Now, just a simple thing, for example, you know, in these new contracts, can we require the operators to be registered to be able to take payment? And if we can we, for example, ask the kids using the service to tap their free bus passes that would get us some money back in? Is that something, are we kind of looking outside the box as to a way is trying to get this back under part control? Because every youngster is entitled to a free bus pass. If everyone getting on a school bus or on a school taxi, any youngster with additional support needs getting in, if they've got that with their companion that comes along with them, can they tap? Are these things that we can look at? Because we need to do something to get these budgets back under control. Because it's not just a case that we're having to allocate more money to them. We never, and David's very, very quick to remind me of this when I talk about stuff. If you're giving more money to one part of the service, you're taking it away from another part of the service. So we need to get these budgets back under control. So what kind of actions are being taken by officers to look and say, right, well, this isn't affordable anymore. So we need to get this back down. It's not about saving money, it's about bringing it back in to affordability, so we're not having to cut other critical services.
That's a very good point, Councillor Milligan. I've often thought that ASN is a very, very important provision. It's a great provision that this council provides. But I've always wondered about the taxi situation on the one-to-one with the child. Is there one or more taxis arriving in the same street at the same time, taking 2 or 3 kids to school? Why can't that be a shared thing? Can we look at that? Is that prohibitive, or is that not allowed within the legislation? I'd be interested to get all the legislation from Dr. Vickers and what the parameters are we're working, because that could be a reasonable request to provision. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, convener. I think anybody listening to this would perhaps feel rather depressed and have their head in their hands and thinking that we're doing absolutely nothing, when that's not the case. I understand that some of the measures that we have been looking at is offering parents mileage to take their children to school themselves. Your point, Councillor McEwen, about potentially more than one taxi being in the one street, if there's a reason for a child not being able to share a taxi with other children, then that might very well be the case. But I don't think it's the case that, you know, parents are demanding taxis for their children. I think there would be a very good reason for that, and I believe that we have buses as well to maximise capacity, so that from an outlying area, perhaps like Pennycook, you would be looking at quite a few children getting on a bus and then being transported up to Saltersgate. So I wanted to say that, you know, there is things going on, and I absolutely appreciate it's not always easy for parents who have got children with additional support needs, sometimes more than one child. You know, some of our families have 1, 2, 3 children with additional support needs, and getting them all off to school is tricky. But trying to look outside the box, trying to think creatively, can we offer parents mileage is a solution that I know the officers have been looking at, and that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCall. Thanks for that. Duncan, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, lots of the ideas that are being expressed today, I think absolutely are being looked at through the project and the project board that's developing the ideas going forward. Where the control measures in this report get us to is that base point where we can then start having a look at those and making those decisions. So including the looking at routes and can we bring transport together in respect of that, whether the sharing of taxis that can go on and including the use of free bus passes, I know are all things that are in active consideration. It's one of the reasons that we need to return to this process at a later date from an internal audit perspective, but also why the cross-party working group is important to take all of those in and come to those conclusions where there are policy decisions that need to be made, that they can be made with members' involvement.
Thanks for that. Yes, and I concur with what Councillor McCall's been saying. There are a lot of good things taking place in Midlothian Council. The good thing about today is the lessons that we've learned and the monitoring we're going to put in place going forward. I know there have been issues about policy or no policy, but the good thing is going forward, we are learning a lesson, a very big lesson, undoubtedly, but a very important lesson. Are there any other questions on the paper? I think we've briefly touched on the fostering section, but you've got that under control, Duncan, you were saying.
Well, yeah, the children's services in association with the business support that they've got are following through on all the recommendations with those to bring that under control.
Okay, thank you. Well, if there are no more questions on the paper item 5.2, we'll look forward to information coming forward that's been adhered to. Oh, Nicola wants to come in. Come in, Nicola.
Hi, Councillor. Thank you. This paper is in the pack for decisions, so could I get a mover and a seconder, please?
Oh yeah, it is for decision. Can I have a mover? Councillor McCall.
Happy to move.
A seconder. Councillor Smale. Okay, Nicola. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to 5.3, the follow-up review, the completed internal audit recommendations and progress update. Again, over to you, Duncan, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is follow-up completed from internal audit on an annual basis. We bring a paper where we look at a series of actions where management have told us that the internal audit recommendation is complete, and we go and then review whether that completion is in full or in part. So you'll find on page 72 of your packs the key finding that of 51 of the audit actions that have been tested, 37 of them were completed in full and satisfactorily. So 73%, 14 or 27% required further actions. It wasn't that action hadn't been taken by management, but to fully close the audit action, there were further actions that still need to be made. They've been reopened and will be followed through to conclusion along with the other 150 odd audit actions that we have open currently, and they're all being monitored on a regular basis through management performance and a system that we have in place for that. What I would say is actually it demonstrates the management do take the audit action seriously, and they take actions to make sure that they're being implemented. Some of those will take a longer time than others, but we make sure that we follow through to conclusion and that they are completed in full. I'm happy to take any questions on that paper.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you for that. Yes, a very comprehensive update. Councillor Smale.
Yes, thanks very much, Duncan. On a sort of meta level, I've known this committee, as you know, for a long time. It seems that we're very much busier in the last 3 years than we were in previous years, and that may be a sign everything's in progress and nothing's ever completed, or maybe a sign you're working very hard, or it may be a sign you haven't got enough resource, because there used to be a little bit more resource in this department, as I recall. So that's my overall question as to work output, resource, and progress that's being made to closing off these reports. The two specific thoughts I have in terms of the table on page 73 and 74. The contributions point. Now, a lot of councillors think it's very important that we get far more out of developer contributions and make sure that we monitor the ones we have at the moment, and if there's intensification, we use that in and get more, etc. You say it's a high financial value, and yet you rate it as low. I just wonder if you could rate it as high in line with the language in the box. The other thing that concerns me is Midlothian energy. This is one that we do, that other authorities don't do, and it requires, I think, therefore, a higher level of scrutiny to make sure that we don't find out about rather Delphic maybe to the year in order to have reporting on middle energy. But that's also a high requirement.
Thank you,
Yes,
Peter. Duncan?
Yeah, sorry, I'll pick that. Thank you, Chair. The recommendation grading is those provided in the original report in respect of that. Absolutely, in terms of energy, there is up to count, but we were further recommending that some of that provide scrutiny appropriate. What is a slightly unusual venture for the council, which it doesn't in any other area. In respect of that one, and in respect of the contributions, that was a decision about exactly which kind of internal governance board would go to cover it, and whether there was a requirement for an additional one to cover developer contributions. And I know Capital Plan Asset Management Board, which is where those discussions currently take place. I know in the meeting are looking at further data around that to decide whether they need that further element or whether they can adequately cover it within that particular board itself. And it was one of those where there was a balance of not asking the same officers to have the same discussions in a slightly different place, but making sure that we have enough scrutiny on what I'm aware is an important issue.
Peter?
Yeah, it's become more important because as we progress towards MLDP 2, there is a need for a 10-year projection of what that's going to mean, and obviously developer contributions and their basis is important for the integrity of the council's overall finances.
I won't put words in any other officer's mouth, but obviously LDP2 is being considered in a number of formats, and there is lots of scrutiny going on in respect of that.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Duncan. Yeah, just to concur with one of the statements Councillor Smale made about resources within your department, Duncan. I just wonder where all this extra work we're giving you, is it resourcing you need, or is it systems you need? I'm not quite sure, but hopefully if there is any alarm bells within your department, you'll come back to Audit or whoever to try and address those things. I'm not trying to put you on the spot today, but you can maybe come back to us should you require more resources.
Chair, I will consider that and come back and have conversations with colleagues on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on 5.3? Duncan, can I just thank you for all your work. I know you've given us your team for a very good support. He needs it this year. Okay, can we have a proposal? Paper 5.3, Councillor McCall.
Happy to.
And this. Happy to propose, Councillor McCall. And seconded, Councillor Smale. Many thanks. Let's move on to our final paper. 5.4. The Strategic Risk Management Risk Profile Quarter 25-26, and we'll hand over to Mr. Derek.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents the Council's strategic risk profile for Q2. As is the case, this is a retrospective view on the risk landscape and aims to provide assurance that the Council took a proportionate and planned approach to prepare and respond to the risk climate at the time. Members will note strategic risks remain critical in relation to the change programme and financial sustainability owing to ongoing financial challenges. In terms of strategic risks, 4 remain critical, and cybersecurity has increased likelihood owing to the current climate and intelligence, which in turn changes its evaluation from medium to high. With respect to the action log, the item 1, colleagues will have considered the risk evaluation as part of the Q2 review, maintaining the same outcome as Q1. It will ensure that this is item 2, as mentioned at the action log recap, will be addressed as part of Q3 report. Across the strategic opportunities, the RAG risk evaluations and associated risk commentary provides overview of the identified projects, and the committee is recommended to note the Q2 risk landscape and organisational response to the most significant risks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. Nicola, is that a legacy hand?
It is a legacy hand, and I'm struggling to get to click. Please just ignore me for now.
Okay. Would anyone like to come in? Any questions on 5.4?
We have our climate change set at very high, but we have ourselves gone from, I think, 2030 to 2045. So I would think it was perhaps a 4. And in terms of the risk control measures, I think we should mention Miller Hill, which of course is a way of creating heat with existing materials and not having to drill oil. I think that perhaps would give a more balanced scorecard. There's a specific recommendation I'd like to make that Derek Oliver well knows about, but where we talk about fire risk. Given what's happened at Rosslyn-Lee, I think we should put remote sites like Vogrie as specific fire risk, and perhaps also the Alpine Coaster area, where I know we've had a number of issues over the years because they're not attended sites at night.
Mr. Oliver, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Councillor Smale. In terms of the climate change risk evaluation, it is a tricky one in terms of how it's scored, in terms of the likelihood and the impact. Those two parameters in themselves are at the highest degree. We know that it's happening, and the impact on climate is significant, but what Mid Lothian Council is doing is on course to meet its net zero targets. And as we conversed and discussed and deliberated before regarding realigning that from 2030 to 2045, we're still committed to making Mid Lothian net zero, albeit not as financially as aggressive as to reach 2030. It gives us that extra time and aligns ourselves with the government targets. In terms of the fire risk, yes, in terms of fire risk assessments and discussion with the fire service, particularly at remote sites, we are aware and alive to fire detection, fire deterrence, but your point is well made, and those are and will be identified within service risk registers, and these being the more strategic. There's the cover-all aspect in terms of fire safety. However, it is a point well made, as I say, and it's something I'll consider as part of the Q3 report. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Derek, there's just one question I would like. I don't see any other hands up from members on the strategic risk profile. Page 98, item 3.24. Hopefield Industrial Estate updated financial model required. Is that a marketing exercise to dictate if there's still demand? Because I was under the impression on Hopefield Industrial Estate it was going to be used mainly for startup units and small units where hopefully businesses who live in Midlothian would like to also work in Midlothian. I know there's been a demand from my ward, but I'm not sure what the financial model required is. Can you update committee on that, please?
Just in terms of Councillor McKeon, the process that's currently being followed has been through the income generating cross-party working group. It also gets reported up through business transformation steering group, and in terms of the capital asks, there's report through regeneration, then up to capital plan and asset management board. There's still a bit of work getting carried out on that site, and an updated report will follow in early course.
Okay, so this is going to be, if it goes ahead, a council-owned and run project.
The council own the site,
Right.
and in terms of options, that will be part of the report that comes forward.
Okay, Councillor Bourne.
Thanks, convener. This is really just a curiosity question. I think I read somewhere that the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry were expecting local authorities to make available records back to 1930. I may be wrong in that. I can't find it, the reference to it, but are we seriously having staff wasting their time, if I can say that, looking back records as far as that? Are we getting requests to go back for the best part of 100 years? Or have I misread something? As I say, I'm just curious to know if that's actually happening. Thanks.
Mr. Oliver?
Yeah, in terms of any claims that come in, the team are having to look into the detail, because it goes back through, regional days beyond or before coming into Midlothian Council. So all that has to be traced back as part of the claims handling. In terms of the recovery and the discovery of information, it is an arduous task, but it's one that the team will do as and when any inquiries come forward.
You okay with that, Councillor Bowen?
Yes, and I don't suppose Mr. Oliver will have figures on it, but I mean, is this happening regularly? Are we getting requests in, 2 a month or 1 a week or whatever? Is there any? I mean, what sort of frequency is this happening?
I don't have those figures, you're right, Councillor Bowen, at hand, but that's something that I can provide off to you.
Okay. Thanks,
Thank
Councillor.
you. Thanks.
Councillor Smale.
Yeah, I'm sorry to prolong the meeting, but I think the quite important matter is raised at page 131, where it's now coming from the officers that we can't really deliver the ship because of the reduction in governmental finance. I seem to recall that both Councillor Milligan and I were offered a look at the long-term projections for housing. My concern being that our reserves would be exhausted, and I think to some extent that the developer contributions are not enough to give any credence to the long-term numbers that we've put into that plan. Am I misinterpreting that? And again, could I ask if any councillor who's interested could see the long-term projection for social housing in Midlothian?
Yes, I would welcome that, Councillor Smale. Derek?
I'll pass
Oh,
to
sorry,
Kevin
Kevin.
Anderson.
Sorry, Kevin. Beg your pardon, Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware clearly that the last council we had a whole suite of housing papers. The SHIP was one of those which has been submitted, and it did give future year projections through to 2035, is my recollection. So there was a disruption to the housing programme, and indeed we did report that through council clearly on the reduction of subsidy in the prior years. There's been a full reinstatement on the back of the housing emergency and Scottish Government's response to that. We're not able to reinstate every project that was in the SHIP of that year, because some things have moved on, but we have reinstated elements of the programme that were still available to us, and looking at other opportunities as well. In terms of the financial modelling, we do have that as an action, as Councillor Smale has returned to that through council and indeed audit committee previously, and it is built in as part of the action log for the rent setting briefing that needs to be carried out to members in the new year. Currently we're undertaking the public consultation, which again was agreed at last council for the rent strategy. So we will be coming forward with that, with the full scale members briefing, and that will include the financial modelling. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Kevin. Councillor Smale.
Yeah, just to pin you down on when will it be, now that we're a little bit further forward with MLDP2, that the councillors can actually see whether we can afford the numbers that are presumed for social housing really going up to 2037.
ideally get to during January with your bank getting. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Councillor support this year in my tenure as chair. I'm very, very happy Christmas. Thank you.
Convener.